the Nigerian Identity Federation, and it is part of a presentation I've made in the past. But due to the circumstances within the country last year and the strikes, I know many people have not been too aware of some of what I'm going to talk about from last year. And then the second half of the presentation will address the specific areas of lifelong identity and using an identity access management platform called Bonafide in higher education and the possibilities that this platform has for extended use in other levels of education, i.e. secondary levels of secondary education levels. Right. So first of all, I want to just define what is an identity federation. And it's really the coming together of organizations to be able to exchange information and resources and collaborations. Now, in this increasingly digital world that we live in, privacy, trust, and identity are becoming more and more important every day. And as users of technology now in the education sector, we're going online, getting access to applications, platforms, and resources, and we're required to log into these platforms. And beyond being able to log in, users want to be able to know who is accessing these platforms, who are accessing these applications for reasons of management and security and other issues around identity. So within the, certainly within the global tertiary education sector and research sector, the concept of an identity federation is quite commonplace. Right. So Nigeria does have a Nigerian Identity Federation, otherwise known as EduID.ng. And it's the academic identity for access management in Nigeria. And it's operated by Eko-Konnect. And we really operated on behalf of the research and education community in Nigeria. So what it does is once you become a member, or once your institution becomes a member of the federation, you have access to certain resources in a trusted manner. And obviously, as the slide says, there's more information about the federation on the websites. So again, as I just mentioned, the whole purpose of these federations is to provide privacy, security, and trust for academics, for students, for researchers accessing certain types of platforms and resources that are dedicated to the research and education community. And these federations also have some governance structure around them. So as this picture kind of depicts, the whole idea is that there are users. These are typically practitioners in education and students who want to access all kinds of resources, library resources, maybe local and international library resources, certain platforms that could be learning platforms or databases, library databases, research data, other kinds of applications. And increasingly within the whole global research ecosystem, there is the demand for users to be able to access these platforms through federated identity systems. So the whole idea of the federation is to provide seamless access and provide authentication and authorization for the different kinds of education users to these systems. And increasingly, these standards are being demanded for interaction with global systems. So there are many systems available today that will not allow you access unless you're coming through a federated identity platform. Eko-Konnect, we have a cloud platform where we provide some services. And in yesterday's afternoon session, we were talking about using a platform called Kotahi for journal publication. So we're going to be piloting a case study for that. And the idea is that anyone who wants to access Kotahi for journal publication would initially have to be a member of the Identity Federation in order to get access to the platform. So the identity management is important from a student's perspective because they have the ability through the Federation to access different services and applications and platforms using one single sign-on credential. So you don't have to have different credentials to access different platforms. And then the whole challenge of remembering your passwords sort of gets eliminated. So that's one of the benefits for students. And of course, because other countries across the globe are also using identity federations, then the opportunity for more collaboration is increased. From an institution's perspective, it just allows staff and students to be able to access a growing number of online services and resources in a secure and private manner. And in terms of management issues, in terms of users of the network, identity federations actually help in the management of that and identifying who's actually using what resource or what application. And within the federation as well, there are different attributes that are assigned to the identity of the students. So based on what your attributes is, are you a student, are you a staff, are you management, or whatever your role or profile is, then the appropriate authorization credentials are given to you when you access a system for the different roles. So again, we're just talking about the core capabilities of authentication, authorization, and administration. So these identity federations actually help in these areas. Now, the identity federations are governed by policies, and the Nigerian Identity Federation has its own policy, which is the policy guidelines are actually available on the websites, and it's broken down into the sections that are highlighted in this slide. And the introduction just sort of gives more of a definition of what the Federation is, gives some definitions or descriptions of some of the terminologies that are used in the policy. And the Federation itself, Identity Federation itself, is a community-driven effort. Yes, Eko-Konnect does operate the infrastructure, but in terms of the governance, there are representatives from different institutions that form the steering committee to provide governance about who can join the Federation, which service providers can be allowed to provide services to the Federation, and other rules. And these rules and guidelines and policies can evolve as circumstances dictate. So this diagram sort of just gives a kind of depiction of how the governance works. So you have the Federation operators and coordinator, which is Eko-Konnect, and then we have a a group that forms a technical committee, and these are representatives, typically technical people from some representative institutions that cover public, private universities and polytechnics. And then there's an assembly of members so that all stakeholders and users who are using or leveraging the federation can also interface with the committee with regards to maybe more people that need to join or specific issues that might need to be addressed with the federation. Currently with the Nigerian Identity Federation, the eligible members of the federation are higher education institutions that are accredited by the NUC, being NBTE and NCCE. But also we are looking now, we're in a situation now where we want to extend that as well to secondary institutions as well. This diagram is sort of just kind of a workflow for how an institution makes its application to join the federation. And so this really involves filling in some application forms, which are available on the website. They're submitted to the federation operator, which is Eko-Konnect in this instance. We sort of review those applications, and if we are happy with the application, in terms of, yes, we know this is a bona fide Nigerian institution and has all the rights, the right parameters for joining the federation, then this will be sent over to the steering group or recommended to the steering group. And once they are happy with the application, then they give the approval to us, and then we inform the applicants, and then they are basically, the institution has what you call an identity provider account or domain created within the Identity Federation. And then you become part of the Identity Federation. Currently, the joining the Federation is free of charge, although we're still trying to look at models to ensure sustainability of infrastructure and support. But at the moment, it's entirely free for institutions to join the Federation. And we are really encouraging all Nigerian higher education institutions to actually join. Now, why join? Well, obviously, as I've described earlier, you have the ability to start to access applications and services that hitherto you wouldn't be able to access if you were not a member of the Identity Federation. But I think more importantly, I think the real use case for the Identity Federation and being part of it is the fact that you can potentially access hundreds of applications for research and education that are available globally through the global federation called EduGain. So EduGain is a kind of interfederation of all the national identity federations, and they're able to make available lots of other platforms for researchers, for students, for lecturers that right now probably not really aware of. And this also includes things like library databases, other library systems that many universities are trying to access and are paying very high costs to access because they're not utilizing identity federations to get access to these systems. So the Nigerian Identity Federation was actually accepted into EduGain last year, about a year ago. But we're not really exploiting the fact that the Identity Federation is available and EduGain is there to potentially give access to hundreds of education resources and applications and research infrastructure. And that will deal with that in the second part of my presentation. There are also legal conditions of use for the Federation, and the policy actually covers all of that. And like I said, you can read the policy documents by downloading from the websites. And if your institution is interested in signing up to the Federation, then the how-to and what you need to do is all available with the second link. Right. So that sort of ends the first part of my presentation. Now, the second part of the presentation actually deals with some of the things that we as the identity provider faced. We only have about 6 or 7 institutions at the moment that have subscribed to the Identity Federation. And again, I know there have been a lot of situations last year that might have slowed down the uptake. So we want to make a lot of efforts to increase institutions joining the Federation. But even in doing that, we actually found as operators, there were lots of challenges. Because when institutions did join the Federation, we were having to, we have the ability to manually have users kind of join, be added to the Federation. And this is done in ways that are not really sustainable and could potentially compromise the Federation if we're using manual systems. So obviously what we wanted to be able to do was have an automated, more robust process by which we could federate members of the Federation into the Federation. And what we were expecting was that there would be some single source of access to institutions, the user data, to be able to do this. But we didn't really have that. And then the importance of really using these federations became more appropriate as we try to operate the Federation. So when we talk about federated identity and access management, you know, it's to be able to allow users to access multiple domains of trust using the same identity, or, you know, or have a situation where a student who was in institution A might want to be able to use some service or application that's been developed by another university, and that university only wants students and researchers from other universities or Nigerian universities to access that application and nobody else. So that is really where the Federation identity infrastructure comes into play, so that some of the standards that are used to ensure identity and trust are implemented across domains to actually make this happen. And the global federation, i.e. EduGain, is really strictly adheres to a lot of these protocols to ensure identity and trust, you know. And what we found as the Identity Federation operator with many of our universities was that the infrastructure, campus identity and access management infrastructure that we would typically rely on in order to federate and present users to service providers who would provide their applications did not exist. And so because that did not exist, it actually weakened the ability of our identity federation to really work as it should. And the other thing as well was that we needed to be able to have an ecosystem where an identity that is assigned to the a student or a researcher is an identity that a student or a researcher keeps throughout their careers, and not an identity that is tied just to the institution. So I'll give an example. When a student enters university, they probably have a matriculation number. So it uniquely identifies the student in the university. But then once they leave that university, that unique identity is no longer valid for the students because it's also tied to the institution. But increasingly with digital transformation and the way students who might move from institution to another, or researchers and lecturers move from one university to another institution, those kind of institutional identifiers, though unique, sort of limits the mobility of the user once they move to other places. And so it really became very important that these identity numbers that are assigned to users will be something that can be tied to the user, and that user can move with that identity to other places, and really that identity is assigned to that user for forever, so to speak, lifelong. And so all of that underlying infrastructure to generate the identities, manage the identities, and ensure that the users have the mobility to use those identities if they move to different organizations or institutions needed to be implemented. And that's really where the motivation for the Bonafide came from. So it's an identity and access management platform that actually addresses some of the challenges that we as Eko-Konnect, as the federation operator, actually was encountering. And as I said, what that was, and we actually did some research, and we found that among most campuses, there was no single source of access to user data. So in fact, over 70%, I think is probably more than that, the data for users on campus does not exist in one source. It's kind of all different sources. So it makes it very difficult to actually do authentication based on roles and access to online resources. So this was where Bonafide sort of came into place. And like I said, this is a platform that's being built by a number of local and international partners that are experts in open technology, who are leveraging the standards and experience of the implementations of EduID in Europe and other parts of the globe to actually build a platform that essentially is able to aggregate users into an identity and access management platform, assign the lifelong education identity, and also have lots of other attributes so that other associated identifiers can be stored in this platform. And it's multi-tenancy in nature. So it means that different institutions can interact with the Bonafide platform, and like it's a single instance to manage their users and ensure that their users get their EduID and are then able to get the benefits through the federated identity systems to access the plethora of resources. So I'm not going to discuss this. I'm not really technically equipped to talk about this infrastructure, but it does adhere to a whole lot of international standards, metadata standards, and security standards to allow authentication, authorization, and trust and secure identification of users who subsequently want to access services available in EduGain and utilize the business logic that's contained in national identity federations, and also be able to access or collaborate to have access to other general services. And the Bonafide partners include really the technology implementers, DataSphere, DASI International, and Switch. But this particular platform is being specifically developed for use by research and education networks in Africa. So it's actually looking at all the issues around.
Owen, you need to begin to round up. You have like about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm actually on the last slide, so I'm wrapping up. So they're bringing a whole lot of knowledge to bear in the development of this platform, and the whole goal is to partner with the likes of Eko-Konnect and other NREMs across the region, so that the community is also engaged in using this platform to deliver lifelong education identity, and also to be able to access a number of services and applications, as I previously described. So, like I said, it's a very high level. I know and I expect there'll be some questions, but this is sort of an overview, and hopefully there's a need to understand digital services, digital identity is increasingly becoming very important and essential across the globe, and we need to be very much compliant. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Owen. A very interesting presentation, and a lot of work that you guys have done, and this is all getting very exciting. I don't know what you think, but do we take the questions and answers for you, or wait and take everything together in one session?
Yeah, we'll probably take them at the end after all the presentation.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, all right. So without much ado, to make his presentation.
Hello?
Hello,
yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me share my slide.
Please go ahead.
Yes. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The presentation made by Owen lay a solid foundation on some of the things that I will be talking about. Actually, the whole essence of my presentation is really to show how we can really use collaborative tools to really improve upon what is really happening in our tertiary institutions with respect to access to some vital components most specifically the physical laboratories that we have. Our existing laboratories in the tertiary institutions, and I'm not talking about universities alone, polytechnics and colleges of education are also in there. The laboratories really are suffering as much as other areas of academic activities in our institutions due to lack of funds. So Usman Danfodi University is really trying to look at how we can address specific challenges, most especially with respect to the with respect to physical laboratories in Nigerian public institutions. And my presentation is with respect to that. And when we look at the context of what we are really talking about, is it has to do with poor funding. And this also affects physical laboratories in our institutions, and which we use for teaching and learning in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. Students in tertiary institutions face many problems using physical laboratories. And these are the things that I will be trying to look at, and we look at how we try to address them. There was a needs assessment carried out in 2012, that is about 10 years ago, of 61 Nigerian public universities. And this was led by no other person than the present INEC chairman, Professor Yakub Mahmoud, who was then the executive secretary of the Tertiary Education Trust Fund. And that report painted a gory picture of the STEM-based laboratories. And these include the limited access that is available in the physical and in the tertiary institutions, specifically created by erratic power supply, as well as restricted access to physical laboratories only within normal working hours. Beyond normal working hours, you hardly have students hardly have the opportunity to access such laboratories. And mostly our labs were crowded and facilities overstretched. That is even where the facilities exist. In most cases now, when you go, the picture is even worse than what it was in 2012, because we all know what is happening with funding of tertiary institutions. And there was also a lack of chemicals, reagents, and tools to conduct physical oral experiments in the physical laboratories. This is quite true because of the prohibitive cost of providing these chemicals, reagents in all the tertiary institutions. So when you go, you just find empty physical laboratories. And the report also shows that there's the ratio of lecturer to students in some universities is as high as 1 lecturer to 500 students. And this situation makes it difficult for students to have proper guidance, equal access to lab materials, and convenient practical sessions. Those labs were designed and constructed to accommodate not more than 50 to 100 students. The facilities were designed for that, and then you find over 500 of them in such a class. It creates big problems. And let's see. Students generally, do not have the opportunity actually to have multiple sessions to carry out practical, due to limited chemicals, like I mentioned, with reagents, limited consumables, lack of access beyond working hours. There's also an ability for students from different institutions to share academic facilities that are available in other institutions due to lack of right infrastructure. And this is really a big problem. Inability to share. You have contents, you have other physical facilities that can be used by other institutions, but because you don't have the right infrastructure to share them, it becomes a big problem. And there's also risk of exposure to hazardous chemicals by students, and risk of spread of communicable and contact-related diseases such as coronaviruses. So these challenges can be exemplified, and pictures normally speak louder than voice. So see what we are talking about. In most of these institutions that we have, look at what we have now on the screen. It's overcrowded without facilities. And this is one of our universities. and it's a biology lab. The students are there, you know, they're just writing on paper. There is no physical facilities in there. Here is another picture, another university biology lab without facilities. The lab is there, facilities are not there. Here is a good physics lab, but without equipment. Look at how well, constructed and furnished it is, but not a single equipment is available and is said to be a physics lab. And here is now a chemistry lab. No chemicals, no reagents, just a dry lab. So students are supposed to learn these practicals in a station where the tools, the reagents are not available. Now, these are the kind of things that we are really having in our institutions. And what Usman Danfodiyo University Sokoto is planning to do is an innovative way to address most of these challenges. And the project we propose is going to, one, develop pilot virtual labs, assess and analyze their roles in improving students' academic achievements and the performances in Nigerian universities. First of all, we want to determine the perception of students and even their performance when we compare a physical lab with facilities with a virtual lab that we are trying to look at in Nigerian universities. Two, the project intends to develop a framework for the adoption as supplements or alternatives. Well, that is, these virtual laboratories, traditional physical laboratories across tertiary institutions and across many disciplines. And you can see that these virtual labs can now be developed and deployed in many disciplines, including biology, chemistry, physics, electrical, electronics, communication, computer science, mechanical engineering, including economics and geographic information system, among others. Wherever we have laboratories that we can use, then you can deploy virtual laboratories to really be able to help. And then evaluate the project will evaluate the possibility of sharing the laboratories remotely across institutions through a learning management system, and we propose to use Moodle. Then Nigerian Identity Federation, eduid.ng, which has already been comprehensively explained by Owen, including the identity access management of ID. These technologies are meant to allow existing laboratories that are virtual in one institution to be accessed by other institutions, nationally or even globally. So the project, if successful and adopted, will lead to reduction in the cost of establishing science-based laboratories across the educational sector, including other challenges that we mentioned that can now be addressed by the system. And UDIS will develop actually these virtual labs with the following features. They will be user-friendly and interactive with real-time 2D representations of all the equipment, chemicals, and reagents, along with data collection, analysis, graphing, and reporting features that will allow students to perform all phases of experiment online. So it's not just the virtual lab. All the data that has been generated can now be captured by the system because we'll be using a learning management system. And then this data can now be analyzed by both the students and their lecturers, depending on how the courses are designed. It will also allow students to share knowledge, data, voice, video, tools, and many other resources from anywhere across the globe. And that is where the eduid.ng and identity management access come into play. They will help ensure that this data and information can now be shared by students across the globe. And the virtual lab will use simulations, animations, and diagrams of real laboratory experiences to allow students to simulate the key steps of an experiment and experience alternative hands-on methods, thereby promoting interaction with the laboratory scenarios. So all those things that they used to do physically can now be done virtually, and they can now experience what it means to really have a lab. And the applications will be web-based, meaning that even with your mobile phones, you can now be able to access them from anywhere. That really is an important concept, because the limited number of access devices we have on our institutions will no longer be an issue. As long as you have an Android or an iPhone, you can now be able to access the applications on a need-to-know basis, provided you have the right access privileges. And complete course activities, resources, and laboratory videos will be there, promoting collaborations. And then there will be all kinds of assessments, both formative that you do as you walk through the course, and summative, which comes at the end of the course, whether they are quizzes, exams, simulation files, and all kinds of assessments will be built into the application. And how would we intend to develop the VR? We said we will conduct a pilot study involving 3 tertiary institutions to test the concepts, most especially that of sharing. 2 courses, one from physics and the other from biology, will be used in quasi-experiments to explore the effect of using laboratory experiments on students' level of achievement. 2 groups of students, that is the experimental group and the control group, will be established with 20 students each from each institution. Lecturers from each course, both that is physics and biology, from each institution will work with the virtual lab software developers to design the course and lab activities. And these are going to be based on the NUC's core curriculum minimum academic standard that has just been introduced to the Nigerian universities. This curriculum, this core standard, defines what each course should be. If you have physics 101 in one tertiary institution, one Nigerian university, is going to be the same in other Nigerian universities, up to 70%. The remaining 30% is what each institution will now contribute to that course. So we would assume among the 70%, all the labs will now be there, all the expected outcomes, objectives are all there, and then the virtual lab, it is built for one university, it is going to serve the purpose of other universities. We would have general guidelines and instructions for conducting lab activities, which will now be available to students. And the notification services by email, instant messaging, news forums, etc., allowing interaction and collaboration among students, between teacher and students, will be provided. So collaboration is very, very important when you come to really knowledge. Once you are able to collaborate between student and teacher or student to students, it enhances learning. So this virtual labs will contain these features, and all the documentations, instruction manuals, other information needed to satisfactorily perform remote experiment sessions in an autonomous way will be provided in each of the courses. Like I said, we'll be using a learning management system actually to promote this. And this learning management system, like I said, we are proposing to use the Moodle learning management system because of its effectiveness, widespread acceptability, and adaptability. It has a large community in the whole world, not only in Nigeria. And it will be hosted on the cloud in the first instance for ease of access globally. And that's the Moodle has the ability to support management, administration, documentation, tracking, and reporting of training programs, all kinds of administrative activities that support learning, mostly constructive theories are there in the Moodle learning management system. And it will also facilitate access to learners from diverse locations simultaneously and support collaboration, asynchronous and synchronous interaction using features such as chat and the forums. Assessment of all lab activities will also be done as part of the course on the Moodle learning management system. All activities will be graded and form part of the reporting facilities that will be available there. The system will allow students to save data in their own folder, whether it grabs or whatever kind of information for letter analysis. And these will be stored and can be accessed by students themselves from anywhere with any computer. Those an internet connection, and they can use them to do all the laboratory reports from wherever they are. So in order to control access and to allow for access to the resources, will be managed using the Nigerian Identity Federation, which is the edu-id.ng that Owen has discussed, and the Identity Management Access Management System Bonus ID. And this we are doing through partnership with Eko-Konnect. We have already established that partnership, working with Eko-Konnect, and these facilities are before us, and we will deploy them, integrate them into the virtual laboratories that we will be creating to really test that ability to share among tertiary institutions. The experimental groups from the 3 universities will be enrolled into the respective courses in the Moodle learning management system. the idea, which is identity federation technology, will allow students across from access from other locations to the respective courses they are enrolled. Once you enroll in those courses which are now accessible, then you can now be able to log in and carry out all the courses that you normally do physically, and everything will now be available on online. And the eduid.ng, which is the infrastructure that presents the education identifier, that is eduid. We have users, staff, students, researchers, they are all there in our institutions. Now, these users are said to be users in our institutions, and the institution that has these users is said to be identity provider. It provides identity of its own users to the global community. Now, if an institution now provides services also, like a virtual library, for instance, or like a learning management system or digitized contents, then it becomes also a service provider. So an institution can become both a identity provider and a service provider. Every institution is an identity provider because it has identities, but only institutions that provide contents become service providers. And see, the institutions that are identity providers provide a way to authenticate and authorize users from their own institutions. And the trust relationship is already built in there. The idea here is this: once you are part of the network and you have your users and you are able to authenticate them, then other users, other institutions will trust whoever you authenticate, so there is no need for them to log in again. So this becomes what we call single sign-on. And this relies on the identity access management platform, where user data and identity information is generated and stored to be effective in presenting secure user data to service providers. So Bonov-ID, like Owen has described, is an identity access management platform, which is developed to integrate an institution's user identity with its national identity federation, and it generates education identity. So the whole idea here is having all our researchers, all our teachers, all our learners to be identified and to be available, to give them the opportunity to access resources locally and nationally and globally through a well-organized network. And Eko-Konnect is providing this solution. It's a research and education network service. Yes, Usman Danfodio University has already joined the eduid.ng and is part of it. Now, the diagram here shows how the whole concept of what we will be doing is going to be. If you look at here, you have 3 institutions, here 3 universities. At the left-hand side, each one of them has an LDAP, local directory access protocol. They are all there, and they go through the Bonov-ID, and they are federated to eduid.ng for authentication. And once they are authenticated, they have now authorization with single sign-on to access resources that exist in an institution or in several institutions nationally and or globally. For instance, in Usman Danfodio University, we have the Moodle, we have the virtual labs, and if we have the Zoom facilities, then once you are authenticated to use the services, then from wherever you come, you can now be able to use it. Same thing, our own students in all these institutions can now be able to access services in other institutions that are available. So Udus and Eko-Konnect, sign an MOU, and Bonov-ID platform developed to provide lifelong identity education is also part of it. And we are leveraging on it, and we are going to use it for the virtual laboratory projects I've just explained that we'll be using. And the MOU will focus not only on this, but long-term requirements of the provision of eduid is a permanent education identifier. This virtual laboratory that we are looking at is just one out of several contents that all tertiary institutions can provide. So we should not be seen to be consumers of contents that are available globally, but we should also be able to contribute and allow others to have access to what we do. By the time your institution now becomes a member, it means now resources that exist in other institutions. Just assume all the 61 institutions who that needs assessment was carried on have e-libraries and they have contents, and your institution, your students sitting in your own institution now have access to all of those resources. And by the time you now connect our network to what we call the EduGain, which is a global network, it will now facilitate access to other research and education network like Internet 2 in the United States of America, providing access to contents in all the universities that are there, or Janet of the UK, or SANET of China, and many, many other research and education networks. So in conclusion, I am trying to recommend that tertiary institutions should implement e-learning in their institutions. Unfortunately, TETFund is doing an excellent job in facilitating and ensuring that our tertiary institutions are in the best environment to do this. One, they are funding e-learning projects in institutions. All tertiary institutions are benefiting, or let me say most tertiary institutions are benefiting from this project. And this is a first step. And to really achieve this successfully, TETFund is also funding deployment of ICT infrastructure, contents, and capacity building using special zoning intervention. This will provide the campus network that is really required for all services to ride on. And TETFund is really doing this also in almost all tertiary institutions. And it is funding the digitization of projects, theses, and dissertations of contents in all our tertiary institutions. Incidentally, the chairman of this session is the chairman of this digitization project, and they are doing an excellent job. By the time all these contents are available and accessible, imagine what we have in terms of projects, in terms of thesis, in terms of digitization in our tertiary institutions. Some have been there for 20, 30 or more years. Imagine now making all these things digitized and available to not only tertiary institutions in Nigeria, but globally. That will be a game changer for us. So it is also recommended that institutions should join eduid.ng. It is free to join. You don't have to pay a kobo for now. It may cost some money later, but for now, it is free. And once you join, it facilitates you also being now a member of EduGain, because eduid.ng has already become a member of EduGain since January 2022. So once you join the EduID, you are automatically a member of EduGain, so you can now be able to access all those resources. And this is really one of the most effective platforms for collaboration among the tertiary institutions that we have. And one of the challenges that is really we're really facing is that majority of our tertiary institutions are not aware of eduid.ng. They are not aware of the benefits and the services that can be provided and the cost, if any. So there is a need to really promote the eduid.ng, and this should go beyond just Eko-Konnect. Other stakeholders like TETFund, like the Federal Ministry of Education, like the regulatory agencies of NUC, MBT, NCC, should all come in and join Eko-Konnect and join NGREN also to really promote eduid.ng, so that we will also become global players. Most of these research and education networks that exist globally will not allow you to have access to their contents if you come using commercial internet. You really have to belong to a research and education network, and because the traffic they are generating there is meant for teaching, learning, and research. So really, you have to be part of it before you can be able to do anything. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Issa Shafe. Splendid presentation as usual. Anytime you make this type of presentations, as one of my friends will say, you make it sound so easy, but we know the tough battles that we have all been waging to ensure that we put technology-enabled education in the front border. And the pitch for virtual laboratories is probably 15 years old. And I think it took COVID to shake all of us out of our complacencies to begin to imagine that we can do many of the things that we are doing physically before or virtually, like this type of interaction that we are having. So thank you for that excellent presentation. And without much ado, I will invite Mr. Mohammed Mahmoud to go ahead and make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll share my screen. I hope you can see my screen and you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you clearly, but your screen hasn't come up yet. Yeah, it's here now. It's here now.
Okay, right. Okay. Thank you very much for having me. And I will stand on existing protocol. And I hope that my presentation will be the shortest. And as such, if you blink, you'll probably miss it. I'm going to talk about identity systems in education as part of policy requirements. So Owen has concentrated on the tech behind infrastructure, and Professor Chafe has also elaborated on an implementation. So my part is to talk about what the Federal Ministry of Education is doing with regards to these identity systems. So very briefly, we've got, we'll talk about mandatory use of the National Identity Number policy, the NIN, and secondly, what the NIN means to education, and the relationships that will matter in terms of agencies and the private sector and other stakeholders in the system. And we'll have a look at the implications for tertiary institutions, which is really most of the concentration in this forum. And we'll have a look at agencies that have started some form of implementation of these policies and the challenges. Now, the NIMC policy actually came up in 2017, making it mandatory to use the national identity number generally, but specifically for education, it concentrates on 4 parts if you look at the document. So I extract matters to us, and the first one is enrollment. So it says that every institution, educational institution, will use the national identity number for its enrollment and examinations and other requirements in the education sector. Secondly, it again specifies that from the primary, if you wish, from the basic sector of education all the way up to tertiary institutions, and professional bodies will also use the national identity number as a policy. Thirdly, funding. Anything to do with collection of funds, of payments, will be done by individuals and corporations using the national identity number of their members. Again, it specifies on the 4th part to separate from the schools. I know that there are members, especially in the IT profession here, that they're members of CPN and NCS. So this is also saying that these bodies will use the national identity number as base requirements for identification. So what are the bases for the education identity policy that the Federal Ministry of Education is looking at? There are quite a number of documents, actually. I've already mentioned one, that is the NIMC document. That's number 1. There's the National IT Policy issued by NIDDA, and then the National Information Technology Education Framework of 2010, the National Policy on Education, and then there's the ICT in Education Policy of 2019. It was reviewed from the previous 2013 version and issued in 2019. And then you have the Honorable Minister's Ministerial Strategic Plan, updated to 2018 to 2022, issued in 2019. Again, you've got other policies coming out of NIDDA, that is the National Cybersecurity Policy and the Cloud Policy. I haven't included all the documents. There are quite a lot of documents. There's the broadband policy and so on, making up the precursor to the education identity policy that is proposed. So, this table looks at how this comes about and how it works through so far. At the policy level, you've got the Federal Ministry of Education. I have not included every single agency, but you have to think about at the federal level, the Federal Ministry of Education is leading that drive, but it will cooperate or is cooperating with other ministries like the Federal Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy, because they do have the expertise, and most of the policy documents on ICT are coming out of that ministry. And then in terms of services, everything we talk about in identity systems, the essential component here is the services that government is going to render to the individuals or the citizens of a country. So if you cannot identify someone, then you cannot locate that person, and hence you cannot provide efficient service. So as I listened to the presentations by Owen and Professor Chafe, I kept looking at it in that sense. These are services provided as you have clear information on the citizens, the users of these infrastructure and services that you're offering. So naturally, it starts from, for government, it starts from basic education. And the whole policy is going to be looking at how this is going to be brought on based on the issued NIMC mandatory NIN usage policy that I mentioned earlier. So of course, we go on to tertiary, where the likes of NUC, NBTE, NCCE, RENS, I haven't mentioned TED Fund here, but yes, this is where TED Fund fits in also. Now, bridging, the very last bit here, bridging is talking about how do we the initial parts of implementation, because Nigeria is a very large country in terms of population. So when you have a policy that is going to roll out into the millions, you have to start from, firstly, of course, a pilot, and from a location, or if you wish, from institutions that will make it easier to propagate. So initially, JAMB is probably the singular most important bridge in this regard, because essentially you're getting into tertiary through JAMB. Yes, you do the NECOs, you do the YX and so on, but finally you're going through JAMB to do this. So in terms of implementation, I'll come to that. We'll see how that transpires. Other services in bridging is FSB, which is the Federal Scholarship Board, in terms of offering funding for education, individuals, for funding individuals in this case. TRCN, registering of teachers and regulation. NTI, professional development and part of registration also. So like I said, I haven't mentioned every single institution. There are 23 agencies under the Federal Ministry of Education. So I didn't want to clog up the presentation. Another way to look at it is through the relationship chart, because for the Federal Ministry of Education is finally to get data. How are we going to do analysis? how do we make this verifiable data accessible and available for budgeting purposes, for research purposes and planning? And like I've mentioned, you can see that JAM is at the center for the tertiary orbit, if you wish, of the plan. I don't have to go through this slide about opportunities because we talked about what people do. Of course, for government, we're looking at mainly out-of-school children. We've got figures coming out of UNICEF talking about 20 million. This is due to the adjustment of the status of data points being taken. Previously, they were taken only up to JSS 3, and now it's taken up to the secondary level of SS3. So Nigeria's number ballooned from under 10 million to 20 million based on that. So that some of the announcements mentioned that, oh, there are like 20 million children out of school, because now the consideration has gone up. It's not numbers have really increased that much. It's because of the change of status. So we're looking at all of this to see how does it impact on the agencies that are responsible for these sectors and for these citizens, starting from UBEC, which is responsible for the basic education sector as a whole. So initial implementation started with JAMB, which has required the national identity number for exams for the past 3 years. It was quite a struggle and a lot of meetings from the NIMSI DG down to my boss, the of Education, and Professor Oloide to get this off the ground. I'll talk about some of this later. So now NECO is on board also. WIEC, which is not an agency of the Ministry of Education, but of course is a partner in this, is also taking that up. Again, what does it mean for the education sector, for government? Some of the other presentations have mentioned this. As a whole, of course, security systems will be better, anti-plagiarism and certificate verification systems, that the unification of this is really important in the long run. Tracking the progress, and of course, generally data analytics for planning and budgeting. What are the challenges? The challenges, the main challenges, that is policies formulation and regulation. There are so many policies sometimes overlapping each other. I presented 8 documents, but I'm sure there are like 15 others that I could put in. And a lot of that makes it very difficult to finalize documents, to get them through regulation, and it takes a lot of time. So having said that, this is part of the conversation, I hope, starting with what Owen is doing and the institutions in terms of rolling out solutions to see how that will coax and make it more productive for government to cooperate with the private sector and institutions outside of that to lessen the amount of time it takes to get policies out so that the users, the stakeholders can run with it. Secondly, concurrency of education. In Nigeria, we've got a general policy that says the federal government is responsible for policy and regulation of education in general, but then states are also able to make policy and regulation within their domains for education with the cooperation of the federal government. Now, in language, that's what it sounds like, but in practice, I'm sure there'll be we can have a new conference on that all by itself. It's really difficult to get things rolling and to propagate this to the states and have this done seamlessly, because concurrency in terms of policy is one thing, but implementation is really clearly a challenge for Nigeria. Collaboration, this one I'm talking about government, private sector, and other stakeholders like international bodies in terms of implementation of identity systems. The government policies generally are looking at open source, open systems, which I'm sure that the solutions that we've spoken about with Owen over the years are looking at that. So of course, government is not here to enforce a particular system. It would be much more viable to collaborate and have systems that cooperate through APIs and other means, because really technology is not our problem. It's more about sorting out these major issues to have things work faster and more efficiently and cheaper for everybody else. Harmonization, I could say the very same thing. In reality, when you have several ministries and agencies and usually having overlapping responsibilities, harmonization is really a concern and a very big challenge. I don't want to run a lot on that because, again, it's quite a bit that we may handle in the question and answer, I suppose. I say funding strategies last because in my take, funding is not a problem by itself. It is the strategies that one uses to arrive at it that is really the problem. So how that is done, what share, how the formula comes out of the policies that we're talking about, it's very important to discuss it with stakeholders and ensure that at the final end, the purpose is to have the end user be provided with quality at an affordable rate. Thank you very, very much. I hope I was as short as I promised. Thank you for having me.
You were indeed saved us a lot of time for us to have a very robust conversation. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed Mahmoud, for bringing to our attention the policy scenario, the environment, and then the entire gamut of weaving through delicate conversations, entities that ultimately will provide us with the end game that we're all looking at. So it's a very interesting presentation you have done, and I have personally learned a lot from the policy side of it. So ladies and gentlemen, we have 36 participants on board. We are going to take this presentation, this session in an orderly manner. You have heard 3 presentations. Owen has given us a background about the work that has already been done, has been implemented as far as educational identities are concerned. And then Professor Shafe added another dimension on how this identity management can be linked to virtual laboratories, a very big gap in our tertiary educational development. And of course, Mr. Mohammed has given us the policy environment and what the ministry is doing to ensure that we are backed up by the right policy framework and legal process for what we are doing. So, so you just, if you want to make a comment or you want to ask a question, you indicate by raising up your hand, and then we'll call you. Keep it short and direct, so that the participants, the presenters, can have enough time to respond to the questions and issues that you may have raised. So the floor is now open for persons to make their comments or ask questions. Thank you.
I think there's an Evans Osapio here. I think I should be able to pronounce that properly. I think he's from my place. Please, can you mute your mic and ask your question?
Yeah, I can. Good morning. Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, my name is Evans Saboyan. I'm a professor of economics at Kuma University, and also the current head of department. Yeah, this question is to the panel, and once again, I want to appreciate the kind of robust discussion from the perspective, and also appreciate the kind of nexus collaboration between the different segments or sectors with regard to national identity and also how to use that for policy. Yeah, my question is the issue of NIN, how NIN is being administered or being issued. Because I remember I have seen cases whereby there are a lot of data inconsistency, and also a lot of when there was an issue with data, people data, the people are asked to go and recapture again. So that goes only to data multiplicity of same persons. So I don't know what NIN is doing or how the ministry or that Ministry of Digital Economy or Ministry of Education can help in resolving one, ensure that we have quality data at the end of the day. Then two, that we don't duplicate or have a multiplicity of data for same persons, and then avoid the reducing or mitigate the numerous errors that we have seen regarding a NIN. Particularly when you want to get a passport, they say it has not dropped, and that can take some number of days or weeks or months, depending on who is pushing it. Either you have to go to Abuja for a quick action, or you wait for months, or you have to pay some money, so to say, which is quite unfortunate. Thanks so much.
I think you'll be expecting Mohammed Mahmoud to answer that, although I think the scope of the question is actually a little bit beyond his remit, I would have thought. But let's see what he has to say.
Well, Owen, you're actually right, and you've rescued me from that one. But like you said, the whole premise is that the National Identity Management Commission is responsible essentially wholly for identity systems as a whole in Nigeria. It has how do I say, a sole responsibility on that, which is why the Federal Ministry of Education is going with that. Having said that, the problems mentioned by the professor are real, and there's some of the kinks that have to be sorted out in the process. But again, I'm happy to say I cannot hold fort for NIMC, but it's one of the things that were a concern when JAM was coming online with using the NIN. But as you can see, at the end of the day, it's a lot more useful to ensure that you have that number, because one of the convincing arguments for Professor Oluyede at JAM was that, look, at the moment you've got numbers that roll out every year you do JAM. You're not going to be able to tell if someone has taken an exam like 5 times. So how do you work with that? How do you sort out the problem? So yes, there are problems, but I believe maybe Owen, next time you'd want to have NIMC on board. Thank you.
Okay. Professor Shifu, I think.
I can't see any hand up from my end here.
Sir, my hand is up. Shafi.
Okay. Shafi, okay. All right. I can see you now.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, okay, thank you very much, sir. I think I will start with expressing my surprise to hear from the TA Minister of Education that we have over 15 policies on all this, I think it's the educational sector. And I really think harmonizing these policies to really get them to be so effective within the educational sector is really a challenge, but it's not something that cannot be addressed. As you can see, Mr. TSR, from the, I think these policies and what the Ministry of Education is doing is not properly felt in the tertiary institutions. I'm exemplifying that because we're hearing about these things for the first time. And when you look at the educational sector, the real stakeholders, a great percentage of the stakeholders that we are targeting in the educational sector are students, whether at the primary level, at secondary level, or at the tertiary level. But if these policies are not felt, or they are not even consulted in trying to develop these policies, then there will be no buy-in for them. There will be no understanding of what they really believe this policy should be all about. I'm not saying that the consultations have not been made. I'm not very sure about that. But the level of the consultation is not broad enough. I think there is a need to really expand the interactions when developing these policies. It should go beyond NUC. The Federal Ministry should encourage NUC, MBT, NCCE, UBEC, and the rest of them to consult widely within the educational institutions so that they can have inputs that are being made. Those forming the policies at the national level may not really have the granular requirements at the tertiary, at the institutional levels of what should be there. But once they are consulted and they make the inputs, then it is now out to the policymakers to really refine those inputs and make use of them. And in the process of implementation, I think a bottom-up approach would be an excellent way to do it. And now that is where the problem is, because the bottom is talking about the primary schools, the secondary schools, and the tertiary institutions. The administrators and lecturers that are in there are in a very good position to really provide input as to how this thing can now be implemented. And when they are devolved to those locations, then implementation will be a lot bit easier, and the Federal Ministry of Education can coordinate. Thank God, with all these virtual facilities that we have, people don't have to travel to Abuja to really be a part of it. Here we are across the country, all participating in this. So this is an excellent opportunity for Federal Ministry of Education to really reach out to NUC and encourage, what do you call them? The NUC, MBT, NCCE, and encourage them to reach out to the educational institutions to be part of what is really happening. And the private practitioners like Eko-Konnect can really make a huge input and impact in what we are doing, because that partnership between the private sector and public sector is really important, and it is what is driving even collaboration and research in globally. So once this is done and we are able to harmonize these policies, because implementing policies as many as 15 is really a big challenge. But once they are harmonized, Federal Ministry of Education come up with a document that it can really be able to use, implementation will be easier. So my contribution really is to really, reach out to the real stakeholders in the tertiary and institutions, do a bottom-up approach in implementation, and try to harmonize the policy so that you can have one holistic policy that can be easily implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shafe. I think the point that is being contextualized here is that in this digital age, identities are very important, and we cannot run away from it. Our footprint, in cyberspace is driven by our digital identities. And for those of us in the education business, it's even more important, because the whole business of tracking our progress from one level to another, the whole business of learner analytics, is all driven on identity. Even support to students, indigent students, disadvantaged students, is all driven by identities. And so if we don't get it right, it will definitely distort our grand vision as far as technology-enabled education is concerned. And you are quite correct in saying that, again, as part of the way we do things in Nigeria, you have multiple plethora of efforts, and I think what the TA to the minister is trying to summarize that ultimately this will end up with NIMS, because they are officially and all forms of identity management in Nigeria, both digital and physical. And when they create that grand platform where we can all end up on their space, then we'll now know we have a single point of entry as far as the management of our identities are concerned. So thank you very much for that conversation. Is there any other hand up? I can see the chat box has been very...
Mr. Chairman, I would like to respond briefly.
Dr. Ade, yes. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Prof, you're right, Professor Tefe, on a lot of fronts, like Chairman has already mentioned. But a correction is that the policies I mentioned in terms of the 15 policies, they're not coming out of Federal Ministry of Education. The majority are not coming out of Federal Ministry of Education. It's a federal government thing where, like the Chairman mentioned, you've got NIMC doing like 6-7 policies that are related to what we're doing. You've got the Federal Ministry of Communications rolling out others, and I can keep going. The point is navigating and putting all of this together to make sense is really a challenge. And to move on to your point with regards to consultation, I'll give you an example quickly of the one I was involved in. 2019, that is the finalization of the ICT in education policy. The Federal Ministry of Education has a fantastic relationship with the professors. So you could say that almost all of that work is done through consultation with universities directly and all of the agencies concerned, like you mentioned, MBT and so on. At every committee in terms of implementing these policy drafting decisions, all of these are involved. An example is, when you were part of last year's drafting of the digital learning policy draft. We didn't talk about it here, but it's yet another policy that is in place. So Owen is not part of government, but he was invited, and fantastic input based on what he's doing and Eko-Konnect is doing, and so many others. So government does do the consultation. I agree that the information sometimes does not go out as widely as it should. And this is something that definitely that should be looked at and improved upon. But government policies are generally available on all the relevant ministry websites and so on. So usually my suggestion also is, when you're looking at putting out new technologies or research, it's really good to have a feel in terms of searching out what has government said about this particular sector. There are usually a lot of policies. The Honourable Minister of Communications and Digital Economy has actually rolled out a plethora of policies that you need a whole arm's length just to get those documents in place in the short period he's been here. So I think that's my take on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that elucidation. Any more questions, comments? There are some questions on the chat box. I don't know whether they want to, I can read one out. Says, the issue of e-learning, in my view, will be better approached from a bottom-up level. Digital footprints and proper identification of the academia is vital in 21st century context. Getting it right from the start point is crucial here. Exactly the point that I was making. There's a hand up. Whose hand is that?
Owen has his hands
Mohammed,
up.
is that your hand that is up or down?
No, it's Owen, sir. Owen.
Yeah.
Yes, Owen has his hand up.
Yeah.
And Mohammed also.
I see a hand up. I don't know. I can't see a name with that hand. You can go ahead and make your comment or ask your question.
Well, I had my hand up, Prof. And yeah, quite a lot of the panelists are raising their hands.
Can anybody hear?
Yes. Can you hear me, Prof? Professor Shefu, can you hear me? Or can anybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Owen. I can hear you, yeah.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
Okay. No, I think what is...
Owen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, sir. I can hear you now. I think there's some.
Okay.
I think there's a little latency issue with your.
I think there was a glitch at some points. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can hear you. I can hear you. Right. Maybe I should move on because moderator's having a slight challenge with his link. But what I wanted to say was from yesterday and today, and I think later in the afternoon, there is a trend I'm seeming to discover, and that is all of us have to get better at dissemination of information. It really does seem to be quite a big challenge, where a lot of work, a lot of great work is going on. There are a lot of policies being that have been articulated. There's a lot of resource within the country that are working on different things, but because of the lack of harmonization and dissemination, I think it's not leading to any coherence. So I listened to the TA's presentation, and I was amazed that there were so many excellent policies in place. And I'm here as an NREM provider thinking, why haven't my strategies and infrastructure aligned with some of the policies that have already been implemented or documented by governments? But at the same time, I also realize as well that with a lot of the infrastructure that we as an NREN are developing, our user base does not know them, does not understand them. And so it makes it very difficult to even approach the governments to say you've got the community behind you. So whatever we have that we can present to government for alignment or harmonization may not have the credence it deserves, because even within our own communities, the knowledge and adoption has been quite poor. And we're seeing this trend throughout the conference. You know, we're talking about identifiers yesterday for repositories. We're talking about identifiers for actual people today. And, you know, it does appear that there's a lot of work to be done on dissemination and harmonization. It was just a comment, and I was wondering if anyone might have some thoughts how that can be done. And I think, Mohammed, you have your hand back up. You want to comment? Okay.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. Okay. Firstly, the issue, somebody mentioned again the issue about the ENIN, or education in, if you wish, and talked about the bottom-up approach. I think I mentioned in my presentation that we actually looked at that, and the numbers in terms of implementation is incredible in terms of cost. That's number one. Number two, actually, again, mentioned in the presentation, is the issue of concurrency of education. You would be surprised of how much, the problems that the Federal Ministry of Education goes through in terms of the communication gap between the federal end of education and the states. This costs a lot of, it's quite a big issue in terms of trying to align and ensure everybody's on board at the same time. And again, the development of systems in the states are varied. For instance, you cannot compare what Lagos has done in terms of infrastructure with, let's say, another state that is struggling. So managing all of that to come up at once is usually a baking problem. Clearly, that was presented when if you recall, when JAMB tried to roll out the NIN initially. It was chaos. It was chaos. I partly blame that on the fact that government was in a bit of a rush. I did the concept paper, presented it, and so on. But somewhere along the line, somebody thought we could just run with it without really following all the steps. So you see, these things happen. And that's why coming up with the bottom-up approach is really difficult, because you're talking about in Nigeria, over 100,000 primary schools that are on the database. There's a lot of numbers, and these are the schools, not the students, the schools. So it's a lot of money, it's a lot of issues to sort out. And you're not talking about, let's say, the Federal Ministry of Education just rolling out a law and saying, okay, look, we're going to do this, everybody has to have a name. No, it's not as simple as that. You have to do a lot of work. I agree with Owen. Communication is really on the down low. It has to be brought up. The exchange of information is not as it should be. And definitely it's something to think about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just to quickly add that we're talking about the kids that are in the formal school system, and numbers for out-of-school kids is like 10 million. And so how do you even begin to capture those ones in the first instance? So very multidimensional set of challenges that requires different types of approaches to be able to tackle. But I think we need to give ourselves a pat in the back that we are on the right direction. We are doing something. Maybe we are not moving fast enough, but I'm sure once the broader advantages of putting all of this into a holistic database begins to become imminent or apparent to the policy leaders, to the political leaders, to the leadership at the level of the ministry and at the level of the National Assembly, then they will begin to throw the right resources and the right operating environment to ramp up the whole process. So I think, Owen, we can...
maybe just one or two more questions before...
Okay, we can take one or two more questions. Yes, okay.
Somebody in the Modupe, I think you can unmute your mic and make your comment or ask your question. Modupe Ola. Please unmute your mic and speak. All right. I think we'll go back to Ahmed Shafi.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mine is just to make a kind of recommendation, actually, with respect to all this NIN as it affects our tertiary institutions. Actually, so much data for many stakeholders exists in our tertiary institutions that can really be utilized. Most institutions have student record system, personnel information system with a lot of data in them. And that is why in the Identity Federation, we are talking about institutions as being identity providers, because they have the identity of their own staff and students, except for the fact that probably that data is not in a format that the NIN administrators are really interested in. But it will just take very little time to polish it and make it available and accessible in such a way that huge, because we're talking about millions of users, and even the out of school children mentioned by Professor Chefu, the institutions that are very close to them are in a better position really to help NINs to really be able to identify them and bring them along. Such databases can really be within the institutions and be made available to NIN. So I think, I don't even know whether there is anybody from NIN here listening to what we are saying, but Sir TA, you are probably closer to the NINs than we are. I don't know whether you are really doing anything with respect to that, but if not, please consider looking at the really existing identities that are there in the tertiary in the institutions. I don't want to say tertiary institutions, they are all there, so that you can make use of them. That which exists in JAMB and the other examination bodies is equally good, but there is much more that is there in the institution that is not there in the JAMB, because JAMB is It's just looking at students, but in the institutions, there are staff also, both academic, administrators, and technical people. So please kindly consider whether that one is really going to be of any use to you.
And maybe to add to what Shafe is saying there, there are the potential platforms and systems that can start to cater for some of this capture and enumeration of the data. And at least from an NREM perspective, we're conscious about these identities that need to be provided, digital identities. We've recognized that we need to even start to go lower than the tertiary level to establish these identities really at the secondary level. The primary level, as you pointed out, Mohammed, in terms of the numbers, is a challenge. But these platforms can evolve, and I think yes, there needs to be more dialogue between the likes of your departments and other government bodies and agencies, and see how we can align the users and the technologies that are available, which are open source, as well, to sort of be able to affect the policies and the goals that we're all looking to achieve. So, and also Professor Shefu, I know one of the things that you're very good at is bringing different stakeholders together. And I think there's a very substantial role that you can play because of the position that you hold within the academic environment to, bridging the various gaps and linking all the stakeholders together so that some of these things can actually harmonize and really deliver on a lot of the policies that already seem to be in place.
Yes, again, we all speak in the same language. We all understand that this is a must-do. We can't run away from it. The other day, somebody was providing an analogy that you recall about 30, 40 years ago when pocket calculators came into our system, and the teachers were busy knocking students in their heads and seizing calculators and asking everybody to crunch the numbers from their head, which was what they used to do in the past. You climb the multiplication tables, 1 times 1, 1, 2 times 2, 2. And if you got to a number you didn't know, you got a crack on your head. And then calculators came and solved the problem. And then teachers fought a long, but lost that battle. And calculators are now on everybody's smartphone. So some of these things, technology will come, start its process, get the resistance, people will fight it and everything, but at the end of the day, seamlessly it will come our way. And it behoves on all of us who are already speaking that language to compare notes, see what everybody is doing so that we don't work in silos, we don't replicate projects, and then we can key into one big system that will help improve our educational system.
Yeah. I was talking last week, I think it was, with the TA, and when I was talking about this conference, and it's about identities, and I think even just from identities in the real world, we're all having to have our name, and then passport is a unique identifier. PVC is another identifier, and then there's a plethora of other cards, BVN, and
the BVN.
there seem to be so many, and sometimes it can be a bit challenging for users to think, well, we know we need to have an identity, but why are we using so many different identities? And then when you come into the education world, we're talking about identities of systems, identities of users. So it can be a little bit overwhelming at times. So, but it needs to be done, and we need to be able to fashion a way to communicate the need and the adoption in ways that can be easily digested by our various constituents.
Yeah, I mean, Owen, if you look back, even the bigger systems, the UK and the US, it's only in the last 10, 15 years that they harmonized their databases. I know in the UK, they had the same type of situation, about 5 different types of identities. And the Home Office now started harmonizing them, and got all the databases to talk with one another. So I'm sure TA will agree with me that we'll get there. And one thing I like about Nigeria is that once a decision is taken, we have that capacity to ramp up very quickly. So, before you say it, the miracle has happened, and everybody's like, "Hang on, how did we get here?"
Yeah.
So
I think we're the only nation that can actually change currency within the 40 days. With a population of 200 and getting you have to adhere to it.
Yeah,
What would take any other advanced nation probably 2 years to do
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
And-
to agree with both of you, Prof, an example is the BVN. Government kept announcing for a year, okay, it's going to end in 6 months. And then before you know it, when the time came, and there was like a kilometer line from each bank branch. So what I learned from all of that is that Nigerians don't get out of bed until there's an incentive. Good or bad, good or bad. So there's either a carrot and a stick attached to the incentive. This is what informed the JAMB bridge. If you now rolled out and said, okay, NIN is required for primary school registration, nobody's going to do it. Nobody's going to do it. But when you know that your child cannot proceed from a certain point, then people will line up and do the right thing. So we need these incentivizations every now and then. I don't quite agree with the CBN on this, but I cannot speak for them.
on that note, I'd like to end this session and thank you very much, our moderator, Professor Yakubu Oshefu. Thank you for your time, sir. I know you're a very busy person. Thank you for being here. The same to you, Mohammed Mahmoud, TA to the Education Minister. Thank you for your time and for what was for me a very insightful presentation. And I'll certainly look to be reaching out to both of you. And of course, thank you as well to Ahmed Shafee from the Usmanu Danfodio University in Sokoto. In fact, I'm wondering whether we shouldn't make you our chief marketing officer. Able to evangelize the Eko-Konnect case better than anybody. But I'd also thank you for your very insightful presentation. And thank you to the audience as well for being here. And I hope this session was very useful. And again, the slides will be made available as well. I think the YouTube videos will also be made available. So anything you've missed or any information that you might need, you will get them when we share the presentations and the videos. So thank you very much for all of you coming. I'd like to mention that in the afternoon, which is in about an hour's time, we're going to have another session talking again about persistent identifiers. And so for those of you who are ICT practitioners in your universities, librarians, repository managers, publishers of content for your institutions, this really is and researchers, this is a session that you really need to attend. Well, so we're going to really be discussing some of the issues surrounding persistent identifiers being used in research and education. And we need to address some of the challenges because the adoption has been very low. So I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you in an hour's time. So if you're already logged in, I would just suggest that you stay logged in, keep your microphone muted, and we will start at about 5 minutes to 1 p.m. We will get the panelists ready and we'll have the afternoon session. So I'd just like to say once again, thank you very much to everyone for this session, and